Good morning. I'm your host, Sarah Sheikh, and I'll be saying a few words about our guest today, Alka Joshi. Alka Joshi was born in India and raised in the US since the age of 9. She has a BA from Stanford University and an MFA from California College of Arts. Joshi's debut novel, The Hina Artist, became a New York Times bestseller, a Reese with a Spoon book club pick, and has been translated into 26 languages. It's currently being developed into a Netflix limited TV series. The sequel, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, which was released to June 2021, will be followed by a third book in the trilogy in 2023. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. And thanks everybody for from the adventures of the Literati to learn about how to write a bestseller, because that's what we're talking about today. So let me see what I can tell you. You know, every author has a very different experience, and every author's trajectory to a bestseller is going to be different. So I hope that, you know, I can impart something of my journey that might make some sense to you. Once upon a time, I lived in India with my two brothers and my mother and father, and we had a nanny who would tell us stories all the time. They were stories from the 1001 Arabian Nights. And like Scheherazade, our nanny would keep us entranced so that we would beg to hear the end of the story, even as we were fighting to keep our eyes open. And that's what a good story does. That's what a bestseller does. It keeps you in its thrall. You don't want it to end. You fall in love with the characters. You want their lives to be better. You care what happens to them in the end. And you want the story to keep going even after the last page. So whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, you want people to care enough to keep reading it. And you want the characters to live in their minds long after they have turned the last page. So that's kind of what's happened with the story of the henna artist. People write to me all the time saying, okay, so I finished the book and now I really miss these characters. I want to know, you know, what they're doing and what's happening with them. And for me, I also miss them a lot because I don't know if you know this, but it took me 10 years and 30 drafts to finish the henna artist so that it would become publishable. And in all of that time, I got to know these characters super, super well. So I'm getting to know these characters, and they start actually saying and doing things that surprised me and that I didn't think they were going to say and do. So that was kind of an interesting thing that started happening. And I loved that. Because it made the writing a lot more interesting for me. I had just as much of a surprise oftentimes in what they were going to do as you might have. And what it did also is it allowed me to write the sequels, because at this point, the characters said to me, Malik in particular for The Secret Keeper said, I really want you to write my story. And you already know so much about my story because of all the pages that didn't make it into the final version of the henna artist. So I would really like you to work on this. And, you know, I couldn't ignore him. I tried to ignore him for the longest time, and then I couldn't ignore him anymore. And then I finally ended up, you know, writing The Secret Keeper of Jaipur just for him. And then, of course, what that meant was that now I was a little lopsided because I had Lakshmi in the first book as the major star. Then we have Lakshmi and Malik in the second book. And I thought, well, I can't leave the world thinking that I don't care about Radha, because I do. And so the third book, which I'm writing currently, is about Radha and what's happening with her in 1974 in Paris. All right. So a good story that becomes then a bestseller has this going for it. It has less to do with the writing than it does with digging deeper into yourself. The writing is actually secondary to discovering the answers to a few key questions that you always have to ask yourself if you're going to write. One is your motivation for writing, and then another is your character's motivations for existing. These have to go hand in hand, and you have to be able to answer these questions. Now, that takes time and patience. This is why I think it took me 10 years to write The Henna Artist, because in the beginning, all I had was the bones of a story about a henna artist who is very much prized in Jaipur because of everything that she's able to do. She's able to help her clients realize their dreams and their desires. How she does it, we don't actually know, but it's kind of fun that we have an opportunity to have her be the star of the show. But I didn't know at the time why this character existed. I didn't know at the time why the story was important for me to write. And so I started answering those questions as I went along and wrote the story. So those can happen simultaneously. So I had to answer the questions. Why am I writing at all? Like, why am I writing in the first place? I never thought that I wanted to be a writer. It wasn't something I started out my life doing. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to paint and draw and sketch. And so for me, it was very interesting. Oh, somebody says they need to make an urgent announcement.
Alka, sorry. Yeah, it's me. Sorry for the interruption, but we just have an urgent announcement. Shatrujit's session will be delayed. Is delayed because of some internal changes that we had to adjust to. So his session will be starting at 12 o'clock. So his readers, please make a note, and Shatrujit's session will be starting at 12 o'clock. And please stay tuned with us. Thank you, Alka. Please carry on.
Thank you very much. So then, I had to answer, why am I writing at all? I think that maybe I always wanted to write. I don't know that I consciously knew that, but my husband did. And within a year of our marriage, my husband kept saying, I think you want to be a writer. I think you want to write. I said, what makes you say that? He said, you're always writing stories. You're always creating stories in our conversations about people that we met, about people we see in the line at the airport or whatever, in the grocery store. You're always making up stories. And I said, yeah, but I don't have any desire to write a short story or to write a novel. And he said, well, don't sell yourself short, because you write advertising for a living, which is what I did. And what you're doing is really creating these tiny little stories. You're creating a half-a-minute story or a 15-second story or an hour-long story, for a corporate event or whatever. And so it's important for you to recognize that you're actually writing stories right now. And it wasn't until 2008 that I realized that I was going to have a slowdown in the agency that I had started, because there was a global crisis that had begun. And the mortgage crisis meant that a lot of my clients were going to slow down their work. Well, if they're going to slow down their work, that means I have time on my hands. And it takes about 2 years here in America to get over a recession, to start having the economy come back again. So I thought, all right, I've got 2 years. I got to do something with my 2 years. And I thought, there's a 2-year program in creative writing that's really near my house. And I could do that. I could finally tell my husband, hey, I'm going to take your advice after 16 years and start, learning how to write fiction. And so that's what I did. And I took a 2-year intensive MFA program, a Master's in Fine Arts. And that is something that surprised me, in that I wanted to write about India. Now, I had come to the United States at the age of 9. I had not been back to India more than 2 times in 40 years. I had no desire to go back to India. But at the same time that I was going through my MFA program, my younger brother said, hey, I bought a condo in Jaipur, and you guys, anybody who wants to go, you can go and stay as long as you want. I've got a cook there, everything. And so my mother said to me, let's go. So that's when I started going back to India. And then I started seeing India from her eyes. And I really did want to write about her India, because it was so different from my memories. And it was also much more charming, because she was describing things that she missed about India, things that she loved about India. And I don't think I'd ever heard that perspective from her before. So one of the things that happened during that time is that I started thinking about my mother as a very different person than just my mother. I started thinking about her as the 18-year-old girl who was in college, whose father had taken her out of college and decided that it was time for her to get married, and they had found my father at that time, who was a young engineer. And my grandfather said, this is a perfect match, let's go. And so my mother, within 4 years of marriage, already had 3 kids, and she just never had a life of her own. My father really didn't want her to work. She had no qualifications to work. She'd never gone to any schooling beyond just that first year that she had of college. And so she never had like a career. She never had any opportunity to create a life of her own. And so I thought, I'm taking this course to learn how to write fiction. I'm going back to India. I'm learning about what mom's India is like. Why don't I write a story about her where she's the central character? But instead of having this very stultifying life that I think she has had, why don't I give her the life that she has given me? A life of complete independence, a life where I get to make all of the choices about what I want. And so that is why I started to write. That is what my reason was for writing, to give my mother this alternate life in fiction that she didn't get to have in reality. Another question that you have to ask is, why are you writing now? Why are you the best person to tell this story at this time? And I think what I realized is that, well, I've got 2 years of downtime. This is the perfect time for me to learn how to write, and I've got the money to do it. It cost $66,000 for me to go through that program. And I think it was time well spent, and it was money well spent in the long run as I came to look at it. But at the time, I just thought, this is my opportunity to start writing fiction and to start writing this story. Let's see how far I can go. So that was my reason for doing that, but you will have to figure out your own reason for why you are writing about this now, and why you are the best person to write this particular story. Please do not go into writing if you think that what you want to do is to make lots and lots and lots of money. Because when I think about the 10 years it took me to write novel number 1, and I think about what I have earned from that novel, it comes out to pennies per page because it took me so long to learn how to write. And this is why most writers have day jobs. Most writers are either teaching somewhere, or they have another, a high-tech job, or they're doing something else to actually pay the rent and pay the piper. And so I am a full-time writer now, and that was very lucky for me that the first novel became such a big hit. And I love to write, so that's something that I figured out I really love doing. But I'm one of the few people who actually gets to write full-time. Now, another reason that people write is they say to themselves, well, I'm writing because I want to be famous. But be careful what you ask for, because I have a fame of sorts. But guess what? When you reach fame, you also have a long downhill road when you fail. And so there's always a prospect of failure and a chance of a very spectacular fall. You can't stay on top forever. And I know that, in my head, and I'm always sort of thinking, well, is this going to be the major failure? Is the next book going to be the failure? Is the next thing I do going to be the failure? I have no idea, but be careful what you ask for. And then some people write because they think, oh, well, so-and-so wrote all about these modern romances that are taking place in India, and they've all done very well with it. So I want to tell my own modern romance story. It's okay to do something like that if you have a very different take on it, if you somehow are approaching it in a very different way from all the other modern romance stories that you have written. Try not to do what everybody else has done. Try to do something that has not been done before. The reasons to become a writer are: you have a driving need to express yourself, you have a specific story to tell, and that was in my case, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or memoir, and no one has quite told it in the same way before. Or you want to reach people at their core. You are trying to somehow convey some basic principles that you believe in, and you want to reach people at their, at the heart of what they think about in life. Because there's a lot of people who write for that reason. And I didn't realize when I was writing The Henna Artist that is sort of what I was doing. Because as I went along with more and more and more revisions editions of the novel, I layered it in with more ideas about what I think about life, what I think about women's empowerment, what I think about why I think women, deserve to have choices about their bodies, and that only they should have choices about what's going to happen with their bodies. So these are all things that I really believe in. I believe in the ability of India as a nation that was under domination by so many other powers for so many hundreds of years. I believe in India's resilience. I believe in the resilience of the Indian people. And those are precepts that I wanted to convey in my novel and in my subsequent novels as well. So these are ideas that are very important for me to convey to the world. Okay. So now you've got a compelling reason to write. You're the person to be writing this story. And now what? So here are the basic elements of a bestseller. Number one, it's the hero or heroine's journey. Every story has to have a hero or a heroine. In the Ramayana, you've got Ram and Sita, and Ram is the major star, right? And there's a lot of stories where Krishna is the star of Indian folklore. There is, of course, the famous Homer's Odyssey, where Homer is the hero, and he's on a journey. So what is the journey that these heroes or heroines are on? What is it that they want to do? What is it that what's their goal in life? And then once you know what the goal is, for example, Ram and Sita and Hanuman are trying to get back from their exile in the forest. They're trying to go back to the kingdom and reclaim the kingdom for King Ram. And that is filled with all kinds of obstacles that get in his way. So obstacles are a major part of a hero or heroine's journey. You have to set up all kinds of points along the way where they cannot possibly accomplish what they want to accomplish. Oh, but wait, there is a possibility that maybe if they could get beyond this obstacle, that they will be able to accomplish what they want. So you always want to give obstacles and then some kind of solutions to those obstacles as time goes on. Let's see, in Homer's Odyssey, he had Odysseus. He had, he had the sirens, he had the Cyclops, he had bad weather, he had the land of the dead. There's a lot of different obstacles along the way. Homer's Odyssey is a classic hero story that you should study for how many obstacles that he has to overcome before he reaches the goal of his life. The more personal your heroine's story, the more meaningful for you and for your reader. You can write the journey in a linear fashion, or you can put it in different time sequences. You can go from the past to the present, or the present to the past. You can actually rewind and go backwards. But the more personal that story is to you, and maybe to the things that you believe about in life, the better your story will be for readers as well. Another very important component of a bestseller are your characters. Your characters are going to make or break your novel. And the thing about characters in my novel, and the thing I really feel about characters, is that you have to make them imperfect, because they have to be believable, because people have to invest time and energy in them. And what that means is that they have to be able to believe that they could be in the shoes of your characters as well. That is super, super important. They have to feel that your hero or heroine is no better than them. They're not some kind of superhero. It's important for everyone to be able to relate to your character. So my main character in The Henna Artist is Lakshmi. Lakshmi is not perfect by any means. She does a lot of things right, but she also does a lot of things wrong, just like we all do. We are all imperfect. We all do good, bad and ugly things. We all do things that we regret. We all betray other people, and we are betrayed by other people. The more you can imbue your characters with realistic traits like that, the more they will resonate with your readers. So even if you're writing, fantasy, even if you're writing sci-fi, even if you're writing, nonfiction, you need to imbue those characters with something real that everybody can relate to. There is a quote I want to read to you by Mary Ann Evans, whose pseudonym was George Eliot, and she wrote a book called Middlemarch, which, if you're not familiar with, is a really good novel to study, how to write a good story, a heroine's journey. Mary Ann Evans at that time was not allowed to write as a woman. And for many years, women were not allowed to write. They were not allowed to publish. Jane Austen wrote most of her books anonymously because she wasn't supposed to be writing books as a woman. So Mary Ann Evans wrote this: "There are few prophets in this world, few sublimely beautiful women, few heroes. I can't afford to give all my reverence and love to such rarities." And what she's trying to say is perfect characters don't make interesting heroes and heroines. All right. And now what you need to know about your characters is that you have to have at least 3 kinds of characters in your book. One is your protagonist, and that's your hero or heroine. The other is the antagonist. That's always going to be the person who's making it difficult for them to go on their journey, to accomplish the kinds of things that they want to accomplish. And then there is always the wise person. So you need a wise person always, because that wise person is going to help you, help your hero or heroine get beyond the sort of limited thinking that they might be thinking in, crossing the river or getting beyond the obstacle of all the arrows hitting them and so on. So if you've read at all The Wizard of Oz, and, I'm sorry, my references might be too Western for you. I hope not. I think most everybody knows The Wizard of Oz. But in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is our protagonist, the Wicked Witch is our antagonist, and usually, even in Indian folk tales, it's always the demon or the evil king who is the antagonist. And then Glinda, the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz, is our wise person. In Lakshmi's case, in the henna artist, Malik is often her wise person, and before that, it's often other people who help her through her life. So before that, it was the old man in the village, and then her sauce was very much a wise person for her. And you can have more than one antagonist, you can have more than one wise person, and you can have more than one protagonist. But I would think that if this is the first time that you have written, it's probably best to have one protagonist. I made the mistake early on in the henna artist of having 2 protagonists. I had both Lakshmi and her sister Radha having different chapters. So it would be Lakshmi's first person chapter, then it would be Radha's first person chapter, then it would be Lakshmi's first person chapter, and so on. And my agent pointed out that in so doing, I was actually making the story a lot less compelling, because she said, Lakshmi is your strong character. Radha, the way that you have created her, is not such a strong character. And I would encourage you to get rid of all the Radha chapters and to incorporate them into Lakshmi's narrative. I didn't want to do it. I fought it. I finally did it. And she was absolutely right. I needed only one protagonist, because my first time around, I didn't know how to handle 2 protagonists who could be as compelling as each other. When I wrote The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, the sequel, I was able to get beyond that. For some reason, I had learned enough from book 1 to be able to have 3 separate voices in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur: Malik's voice, his beloved Nimmi's voice, and also Lakshmi's voice. And all 3 of them have their own chapters in first person in The Secret Keeper. And the readers have always told me, each of them works. Each of them is compelling, and each of them is worth reading. So I think I finally learned how to create more than one protagonist. But if you're first starting out, then please just have one protagonist. It's just easier that way. Don't forget that your place is also a character. It's not just people, but animals can be a character. Let's say if you have a man and his dog, or a woman and her cat, or whatever, those can also be characters. But place can definitely be a character. In my books, definitely, Jaipur is a character in the book. Jaipur is the setting where a lot of exciting things are happening post-independence. Buildings are being built, and the Maharanis and the Maharajas are still around, and there's this wonderful vibrancy about people feeling like they can rebuild India again after 200 years of British rule. So Jaipur becomes a character. So don't forget that your place can also be a character. It will ground your story, it can have a personality, and it influences the way your characters move in the environment. Another thing that's important, another element of a bestseller, is your character arc. You have to think about each one of your characters. Even if it's not the protagonist, you want each of your characters to have some kind of arc from beginning to end. That means that they have to have some change that has happened in them. They have learned something throughout this journey. They have maybe changed their attitude about something. Maybe they have accepted loss in a very powerful way. Maybe they have overcome some kind of grief. These are the really big things, the big transformational arcs that your characters need. Your major characters need those. Not every character, but your major characters need all of those. And sometimes even your antagonist can go through a major character change, and that could be very interesting as well. In Jane Austen's Emma goes from a meddling busybody to gaining a lot of self-knowledge about who she is and why she's meddling, and is that really necessary? So that's something that happens in that story that is a major change in the protagonist's arc. Another element that you want to keep in mind for a bestseller is the point of view. Who is telling the story? A lot of people send me bits and pieces of things that they're writing, and they want me to comment on them. Please don't do that, because I am too busy writing. I don't actually have time to do that. But I remember in my classes, when we would workshop people's pieces of writing, one of the things that I would see is that people would forget that they were in the first person, and suddenly the same character is being conveyed in the third person, or there's an omniscient narrator all of a sudden, and maybe we're in the second person. So please keep in mind that your point of view has to stay fixed for your character, unless you're really an accomplished writer and you're writing something that is very avant-garde and you want to keep changing the points of view just to make it interesting for readers. You could do that, but if you're just first starting out, and I imagine that many of you might be just starting out telling a story, then it's probably best to stick with one point of view. And in the Henna Artist, it was Lakshmi's first person point of view, because for me as a writer, the first person point of view is where I feel the closest to my character, and I can imagine a lot more about what's going on in their lives. I did the same thing in The Secret Keeper. All three characters whose story I am telling in the first person are all in the first person. And then the third book that I'm writing about, Radha, is all about her first person narrative. So it's just important for you to know that you are writing in one point of view, or a point of view, and stick with it if you can. At a later point, you can start experimenting, but in the beginning, stick with one point of view. I do a lot of research for my novels because they are historical novels, but that's not the only reason to do research. When you do research, for example, let's say that you want to find out exactly how this particular ring was made, because maybe your character wears this ring. Well, you might want to go and search on the internet, because the internet is so wonderful now, and you can pick up almost everything at the internet instead of having to go to the library. If you can go to the library and look up, fabulous jewelry from the 1960s, then, that would be a great thing to be able to do. But you can also find a lot of information online. And maybe you're going to look for information online about a silver ring with some garnets in them, and, in the 1960s, and what those kind of designers were making in the 1960s. Because as you write your narrative, the more specific you can be about cars people are driving, about the clothing that they're wearing, about the fabric of the clothing. Because remember, every decade brings different fabrics and different styles and different, wearer preferences. And you can imbue all of your characters with very specific tastes if you do that. Another kind of detail that I always put in my books, because Indian food is so important to me and I love Indian food, is that I put a lot of detail about Indian food in my books. And to the point where my editor finally said, in your books, why don't you put some recipes in the back? Because we know we're going to get a lot of comments about the food that you put in your books. So I did. So every book now has recipes in it that I have talked about in the narrative. So, those are the kind of specifics that you want to put in your narrative. So your narrative doesn't just feel like, sort of a pie in the sky story. It feels grounded in reality. That's what you're trying to do. All right. I have tons of these little notebooks. This is how I do my research. Whenever I run across anything that seems interesting, I have tons of little notebooks like this. And I have stacks and stacks of them. I will make notes of anything I find interesting. Then what I do before I start writing, or as I'm writing, is I will go through the notebook and I will get a highlighter and I will highlight just little portions that, now that I have had distance from this research, I can go back and go, okay, now that is really interesting. I want to pull that little factoid out, or I want to pull that little history piece of history out. And then I go through all of my highlighted areas, and I make a list of all of the highlighted things to make sure that I include them in the narrative as I go along. So that is something I worked out that works for me. And so, if that works for you, then do that. If you love to do research in some other way, please share that with us. That would be wonderful. All right, now, every scene in your novel, in your piece of fiction, in your memoir, has to have a reason to be there. You have to have an event happening in every scene. There is no scene that just has two people saying hello to one another, looking at each other, and then leaving. That's not a scene. And there has to be something happening in that scene. It has a function in the narrative. And you need to know what the function is before you start writing that scene, or as you're writing that scene. Make sure it has a purpose and that it has a structure. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end of every scene. And as you get better at writing, more proficient, you will learn that maybe you don't need the beginning and the end so much. Maybe you can just go right into the middle of the scene and really make that impactful, because that's also a possibility. But in the beginning, make sure your scenes have beginning, middles, and ends. Make sure that there's an emotion in every scene. And, you have to have characters feeling things in those scenes. We have to know what they're feeling. And the feeling isn't just what they're thinking. Remember, thinking and feeling are two different things. Feeling is what happens in your body. So, if a character is really scared, how does that show up in the body? Are they shaking? Is their body shaking? Are they flushed? Is their skin turning a different color? Do their toes curl when they get angry? These are all different body functions that we all have, and you want to imbue your characters with realistic ways in which they're experiencing emotion in a scene. So remember that is really important. And a scene you want to describe: is it cold or hot in the room? What does it smell like in that scene? Are we inside or are we outside? Are we in a restaurant where you can smell all kinds of different smells? Are we in a bathroom where you can smell all kinds of different smells? What what are the sounds in that room? If we're in a restaurant, do you hear the clinking of all the silverware against the plates? Or, are we in, an outdoor garden where you can hear children playing, where you can hear kites flying up ahead, that kind of sort of sound that kites make when the wind is running through them. So, these are important little details that you want to make sure you write in your scenes. What is the food that people are eating in a scene? What's the music that they're hearing? These are all really important little details for every scene, and they will make your scenes come alive. Another component of a well-written book is dialogue. In my experience, watching TV and movies was really important. It was one of the first ways that we as immigrants to the United States switched from a sort of an Indian English to an American English. Within 3 months, we were speaking with a whole different accent, and we were learning all of the idioms in the English language that everybody around us was using. We were learning all of the subtexts that people don't say but convey in other ways, and all of that I learned through TV and through movies. But I want to make a distinction between good TV and movies and bad TV and movies, because there is a difference. And, like the masala movies, for me, just personally don't do anything because I find them shallow and I don't really find that, the characters are realistic. But, if you're going to watch Satyajit Ray movies, if you're going to watch Rabindranath Tagore movies or movies that have been made out of his stories, those are the ones that are worth watching, because those have really fabulous details about how people express themselves in emotion, and how people look at one another when they are talking and trying to express, what they're feeling. So those would be wonderful movies to watch. And dialogue is very important in these kinds of movies and TV shows, the really good ones. So you want to pay attention to the dialogue. You want to see, where it's all going. If you get stuck, and you're going to get stuck, that's a very natural part of writing. You want to try different things. One thing that I do sometimes is, okay, let me just play my what if game. What if the main character was an animal? What if the antagonist turns out to be a nice person and we didn't know it until chapter 5? What if my characters have been raised in outer space? What if the main character is a spider? It's a fun thing to do, and it gets you out of your stuck mode, and then your creative juices will start flowing again. It may be a silly little hat trick, but it works. Another thing is, why don't you try telling the reader less than you already have? Maybe you have explained too much. Maybe you have told us exactly how people are feeling and a little too explicitly. And maybe you need to hold some of that stuff back. You could also try maybe changing narrators. That may be the person that you started with the narration, the person whose point of view we're in. Maybe they're not the strongest person to be in the point of view of. Maybe you need to be in the mother-in-law's point of view, whatever. So these are just ways in which you can try getting unstuck. Another way that I, get unstuck is I actually stop writing. I go for a walk. I go for a bike ride. I go swimming. I do anything but write. And by the way, I do not write every day. I do not have a practice where I have to write a certain number of words a day, or that I have to write at a certain hour every day. People say that that is something you need to form a disciplinary habit, but I'm a very disciplined person. And I think that because I ran my advertising agency for 30 years, I understand what it is to meet deadlines. I understand what it is to pace myself so that I'm doing a little bit of work every now and then and keeping up with all the workload that I have. I meet every single deadline, or at least I should say 99%. Every now and then, I'm not perfect. Every now and then I fail. But, for me, it's more important to take time away from writing so that when I come back to it and I read over what I have written a week later, a month later, that it resonates with me. And if it's resonating with me, I know it's going to resonate with you. If I'm bored by what I have just written, I need to start over, because if a writer is bored with their own subject matter, with their own narrative, I can guarantee you the reader is going to be, bored by it too. So the three things that, in summary, I would tell you is that the magic of the 3 Ps will really come in handy when you're trying to write a bestseller. Persistence, stick with it. If it takes you 10 years to write a book that somebody is willing to sell to a publisher, stick with it, stay with it, do other things while you're doing it. Don't be in a hurry, please. Number 2, have patience with yourself, because there are times when you're not going to be able to write as many pages, or you're not going to be able to finish a story. You get frustrated, but be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. You know what? We all need time off. Give yourself time off. Just don't pressure yourself into finishing something that's not working for you. Number 3, the third P in my 3 Ps is passion. And passion for me is really my moral compass. What's my truth? So my truths are the way that I write my books, and what I want to write about are, I have pride in my country of birth, and I want to make sure that comes through. I am trying to correct some of the perceptions that people around the world have about India, about it being underdeveloped, about it being a very poor country or illiterate or whatever are the misperceptions they have. It's important for me to try to let people know there are all kinds of people in India, and there are varying degrees of poverty, and there are varying degrees of wealth also. Another truth that I always like to write about that's a passion for me is women's choices about their bodies, women's choices about their health, women's choices about their careers and marriage. It's very important for me to always write about women who are able to get beyond the patriarchy. The ability to grow and change and learn at any age is very important for me, because I have lived that life. This is probably my 4th career, being a full-time fiction author. And so it's very important, I think, for everyone to realize you're never going to stick with one career. And if you are, I hope you really love it. And then, of course, another one of my passions is to talk about the inequity of gender, class, and caste, and to not sugarcoat it, but to actually talk about the reality of maybe some of the ugliness of our lives, some of the unfairness of our lives that we live with day to day. In closing, I would like to read to you a quote from Mother Teresa, which, I don't know a lot about Mother Teresa, but I loved this quote, and I put it in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur. Here is how it goes. If you do good, people may accuse you of selfish motives. Do good anyway. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. Be honest and transparent anyway. What you spend years building could be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you may get hurt. Give the world your best anyway. There is no guarantee in life. There's no guarantee that whatever you write will become a huge bestseller, or the next great American novel, or the next great Indian novel. But there is every guarantee that you worked hardest on it, that you tried to learn as you went along, and that your intentions were pure. You had an intention for writing, and it was important for you to write it, and you knew the reasons why you wrote it. So do it. Do it anyway. So that is my presentation. I don't know if you have questions in the 10 minutes that we have remaining. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question?
Okay, so there's this question from Anya. I usually lose the will to write a certain piece if I feel it's not turning out well. Really, thank you for those tips. Okay, she's appreciating it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because, there are times when your writing is not going well and, you want to give up, but it's really best to just walk away from it and think about it or not think about it for a while. When you come back, read what you've written, you may actually have a very different take on it once you read it again. You may go, hey, this is pretty good. Because I have to tell you, I gave up on the henna artist several times during that 10-year journey, and I didn't touch it for like a year at a time or 2 years at a time sometimes. And when I finally went back to it and I read what I had written, I thought, hey, why am I so down on myself? I like this story. I like these people. I like these characters. I think it's going to turn out okay. Ashwin, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hello. Is there any good craft book which you can suggest, like based on like the craft of writing?
There is a good scene book, and it's called The Scene Book, SCENE, and it's by Sandra Schofield. And she was one of my editors for The Henna Artist. She did a fabulous job. So I think that is a good book. But I have learned a lot more from being in classes where my work was being discussed by all the other students and the instructor. That's where I learned the most, because when other students are reading your work, they're not trained in the art of writing yet. And so they're giving you their very raw opinions of what they think about your work. The instructor then takes everybody's opinions and is able to crystallize what it is in your writing that might be missing that they can tell you to work on. So I learned a lot more from those workshopping classes. And if you have an opportunity to be in those kinds of classes where your work is being reviewed by a whole bunch of other students and you are reviewing their work as well, that is, I think, the best way to learn. Best way to learn.
Okay,
ever.
thank you.
You're welcome.
We have another, thank you, Ashwin, for that question. We have another question from Abin. She says, I want to know how I can develop a female protagonist as a male writer, especially when another character in the story who has a male is a reflection of myself.
Okay, so Abin, what you need to do is talk to your sisters, talk to your girl cousins, and ask them, how would a woman react in this particular situation? Here's the situation. Here's the scene I'm writing. How would she react? What would she be like in this particular, what would she say? What would she do? I think that talking to your girl cousins and any girls in your environment are probably the best way to learn how women think. The other way is what I mentioned earlier. If you look at Satyajit Ray movies, you will get a really clear idea of how women think. Because those movies, regardless of what time period they were in, like The Big City is one of the best movies that I can recommend to you. And another is Charulata. And those, even though they're taking place in different time periods, they inform so much about how women feel, about how they react in situations with men who are, I don't know, overpowering them, or men who are wanting something from them, or men who are ignoring them, or, whatever. So those are very specific things that I would recommend you do, Abin.
Thank you, Abin. Next, we have Syamal Rao, and they are asking, I have come across writers saying that they emotionally bond with characters they create and they are disturbed when their role is over in the story. Do you have any such character in the books you wrote, ma'am?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very emotionally bonded to all of my characters, and I'm very sorry to see them go. When I finish a book, I feel sad that they are no longer there. But I think because the first book did take such a long time, my characters are always with me, and I take showers with them. I go to bed with them. They're on my bicycle with me every day. And so I'm constantly thinking about them. And I think that they are probably as real to me as a second family would be. I also think that my characters teach me things. This is something you'll find as a writer. As you go deeper and deeper into your characters, as you think about who you are, why you write, what is important to you in life, what do you individually think about yourself beyond what your family thinks, beyond what your cousins think, beyond what your friends think. Those are the kinds of really important pieces of information you're going to put in your writing, and they will teach you, those characters whom you develop, they will teach you more about yourself than you ever realize. I learned a lot through my characters. I know that's going to sound weird, but I did. And I think that you will too.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Samira and Naveen both are thanking you for the wonderful insight from this session, and Abhin also says she will definitely follow your advice, and the entire session was really interesting and amazing. And it was actually, it was really fantastic, and thank you so much, ma'am, for being here and sharing your thoughts with us. It was really amazing and wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for the lovely session, ma'am. It was really wonderful having you.
Good. Oh, good. You are so welcome. And I hope, I hope it was helpful to people. I hope that it, helps them. Don't be so concerned about getting an agent right away. Please, please work on your work before you get an agent. Work on making it the best work it can be. Work on making sure that you have a lot of different people critiquing your work before you go get an agent. Everybody wants to know, how do I get an agent? How do I get an agent? The work is not there yet. First, work on your work, and then you will find it much easier to land an agent. The one thing that you can do, by the way, is look in the back of all the books under the acknowledgement section. In the acknowledgement section, you will see whom the writer credited for helping them with the work. And as you read those names, and if you keep reading the same names over and over again from the books that you love, you will know that those people will be responsive to your work as well. So those are the agents, those are the editors, those are the people whom you want to send your work to as well.
Okay, we have a quick question coming up. If you'd like to take up, ma'am?
Sure.
Especially us, I find it a bit difficult to express emotions in the mind of characters and the physical reactions. Please, could you give me some tips?
Sure. So think about you, okay? So think about yourself in a certain situation. Let's say that you had to go talk to an instructor, and you were kind of dreading it because maybe you're going to ask them, to give you an extension, or you have to take time off to be with your family, or whatever. And so I think the best thing to do would be to write out how you felt about yourself in that situation. And as you start writing, and as you start developing how to talk about your own feelings, it will become much easier for you to have your characters have feelings similar to what you're discovering about yourself. Until you can talk about your own feelings, until you can talk about how you feel about things, I think it's very hard to have characters who are also doing those things. So think about certain situations you've been in that have been difficult. Maybe they are situations about love or romance or career or studying, or whatever it is that's going on in your life, maybe a difficult person that you have to deal with every day, and write out how you feel about that. Write out how it feels in your body to feel those feelings. Is your heart starting to race because you're thinking about some guy you have to go talk to about something that is, really important to you. So, think about what's happening in your body and write all of those feelings down. The more you do that about yourself, the easier it will be for you to describe characters who are doing that. Okay?
Yes, I think that answers the issue. And thank you for being such an amazing audience. Also, I think, a really helpful and amazing session with you, ma'am. I never even realized some of the mistakes. Yes, Anya. And it was a wonderful insight. Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for Adventures of the Literati for inviting me. And I hope you guys happy writing. Bye.
Bye, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.